These moments are not for the faint of heart as they involve intense fight scenes, emotional turmoil, and often leave a lasting impact on the characters involved. You've been warned. Welcome back, Nerd Squad. It's me, Amanda McKnight, aka VampX13, but you can call me Vampy, and this is the top 10 most brutal superhero defeats. Which fight haunts your memories? Number 10, Daredevil vs. Kingpin. Issue 227 of Daredevil, called Apocalypse, is a significant event in the Born Again story. It is considered one of the most devastating defeats that Daredevil has ever faced. In this issue, Kingpin discovers Daredevil's true identity and uses it to basically destroy his entire life. Kingpin's actions here are not limited to just killing Daredevil. He turns it up to like 11. Instead, he decides to take a more sinister and personal route. Kingpin starts by destroying Matt's law practice, making it seem like he bribed a witness. But that's not all. Kingpin goes on to ruin his finances, his sanity, and even blows up Daredevil's apartment, destroying his costume in the process. This defeat is a turning point for Daredevil, and it leaves him feeling helpless and defeated. However, he does realize that he now knows who is responsible for his suffering. It is none other than the powerful Kingpin. Despite his despair, Daredevil's determination and resilience are stronger than ever as a result. He is ready to fight back and finally take down the Kingpin once and for all. Sometimes you gotta lose everything to beat the baddest guy there is. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not check out our Brutal Comic Moments playlist. Number 9, Superboy Prime vs. The Darkest Knight. This particular fight scene is quite heart-wrenching, honestly. It takes place in the comic book Dark Knight's Death Metal: The Secret Origins. Although the fight itself is brief, it has significant emotional and character development implications. Superboy Prime faces off against the Darkest Knight with the hope of defeating him and saving the multiverse. While he doesn't entirely succeed here, he does turn the tides in favor of his fellow heroes. This story provides an excellent redemption arc for Superboy Prime, who was once a hero but turned into a massive villain due to the heartache of losing his world. During the fight, the Darkest Knight offers to spare Superboy Prime and even invites him to join his army of Supermen. Superboy Prime sees a vision of the life he could have in the future, where he is once again a hero fighting alongside his colleagues. However, he realizes that this would not be the world he lost, as both his parents and Lori would still be absent. Despite the temptation, Superboy Prime ultimately chooses to fight against the Darkest Knight and gives his life in doing so. This is a crucial moment in the story where the tides actually turn for our heroes, weakening the darkness and allowing them to rise up. It is later confirmed that Superboy Prime did indeed die as a result of fighting back, but while he lost the battle, at least the heroes were able to then win the war, thanks in part to his sacrifice. And Superboy Prime either gets his world back through his journey into the afterlife, or possibly through the multiverse's reconstruction following the resolution of Death Metal. Number 8, Black Panther vs. Moon Knight. In the Avengers Age of Khonshu story arc, Moon Knight confronted a majority of the Avengers. During this confrontation, he faced Black Panther directly in Wakanda with his army of Khonshu worshippers. Moon Knight's presence was so intimidating that Black Panther actually just chose to surrender instead of fighting him. It should be noted that this was likely a strategic decision on Black Panther's part. However, the fact remains that Moon Knight managed to get what he wanted, a voluntary surrender from Black Panther without even actually having to come to blows. A whole other kind of brutal, really, when you think about it. Especially when you consider that in the next issue, T'Challa was imprisoned, tormented, and basically forced to submit to the power of Khonshu. Number 7, Batman vs. Reverse Flash. This fight was emotionally distressing for numerous reasons, and it represents the exact type of fights I want to highlight on a list like this. In the 2016 comic Batman issue number 21, which is part of the Button story, Batman is compelled to fight against an adversary who completely outclasses him, the Reverse Flash. He is brutally attacked, and even though it appears that Batman is doomed to lose here, we later discovered that he had already kind of won by accepting the fact that a direct fight would result in his defeat. Knowing that his best strategy would be to stall until Barry Allen's The Flash returned, he was able to succeed and save his life despite, well, kinda losing the fight. It was a strategic loss, but he still gets pretty badly beaten. Number 6, Deadpool vs. Moon Knight. In issue number 8 of Vengeance of the Moon Knight, Deadpool and Moon Knight face off against each other. Although Deadpool is known for being a brutal vigilante and anti-hero with superior healing abilities, it is Moon Knight who actually emerges victorious here. The fight between the two characters highlights their similarities and their differences, as they both use pretty violent methods and both have their own inner voices to contend with, and are often both misunderstood characters and heroes. However, despite these similarities, Moon Knight manages to make Deadpool admit defeat and surrender by using his sword, with Deadpool finally saying, "Uncle." And you know Deadpool doesn't go down easy, so if he's saying uncle, I'll just let you imagine what happens. They don't really show us, but it's the fact that they don't show us that like traumatizes me. Number 5, Jason Todd versus Joker. This is going to hurt you a lot more than it does me. The famous line spoken by Joker before he brutally attacks Jason Todd with a crowbar. This all went down in the Batman story A Death in the Family. Fans at the time were able to vote on whether or not Jason Todd would actually live or die in this story, and after the brutal attack on his life in issue 427 that ends with an explosion going off which buries his body in rubble, in issue 428 we'd get our answer to that question, and Jason would indeed end up seemingly dead. Number 4, Ghost Rider versus Carnage. During the Absolute Carnage event, Carnage had a field day. He defeated both heroes and villains with seeming ease. Anyone who had ever been in contact with the symbiote in the past was basically a target in this event. Carnage's ultimate goal was to collect all the codices from the spines of those who had ever been bonded to a symbiote. Yeah, you heard that right. From the spines. The list included Alejandra Jones, who was a spirit of vengeance, also known, of course, as Ghost Rider. By the time Carnage arrived at her doorstep, Alejandra had already expended much of her power while defending her village. Unfortunately, Carnage managed to overpower her and take her life. Really sucks because I actually really liked Alejandra. Alejandra was sent to hell, but she was able to return and get her final vengeance on Carnage while also protecting her village. So although she lost her life, at least she got to protect the village, you know? Number 3, Invincible versus Conquest. I recently got caught up with the first part of the second season of Invincible, and just as before when I watched it, I was blown away by the numerous, intense, and captivating fights and storytelling in this show. This show and comic series does an excellent job of creating both physical and emotional stakes for its characters. While I could talk about any of the memorable fights in the comic series, I want to give a special shout out to the fight between Invincible and Conquest. When Conquest arrives on Earth and demands that Invincible take responsibility as the Viltrumite liaison, Mark is already dealing with a lot of emotional baggage, let's say. Despite this, he decides to take on Conquest in a fit of anger and resentment, only to learn the hard way just how powerful his opponent is. The fight becomes even more intense when Adam Eve enters the fray, having flown herself out of a hospital bed just to help Mark. Number 2, Venom versus Carnage. At the end of the Absolute Carnage event, Cletus Cassidy as Carnage gave Eddie Brock a choice between saving the world or saving his son. It wasn't a simple choice, but rather a choice between saving his son and basically letting the world fall victim to Null, or not saving his son, and well, the world would probably fall victim to Null anyway, but he wouldn't be the one who was more responsible for this happening. In the end, Eddie chose to save Dylan, which ultimately led, of course, to the awakening and return of Null. Although, like I said, it was a tough choice because either way that was probably gonna happen. This was a brutal defeat to read because either way, Eddie would have really lost and Carnage would win, even if Carnage didn't survive. And even still, somehow, Carnage did end up surviving this, because Carnage is still around now. Number 1, Invincible versus Omni Man. One of the most memorable and memeable lines from this superhero defeat, and the Invincible animated series overall, I would say, is "Think, Mark." However, there is a more brutal line than that said by Omni Man during this fight. One spoken when he suggests that he could actually kill Mark with his own hands and make another child, asking, "What's 17 more years?" As a Viltrumite, Omni-Man's lifespan is much longer than a human, so 17 years is a brief span of time to him, relatively. This reduces the emotional connection he has built up with his son to something seemingly meaningless. Especially heartbreaking for us who've been watching that bond build, and then you say that, you're like, oh. It's honestly heartbreaking to watch, making the beating that Mark takes even more brutal. Nevertheless, we know that for Omni-Man, who honestly does love his son, it is not that simple. Ultimately, while he wins the fight, he is unable to deliver the killing blow. That's about it. Until next time, you stay nerdy, YouTube.